started with the history of Houdini and I looked into a company called Omnibus, which was a computer graphics company from the 80s. After it went bankrupt, two of the employees, Kim Davidson and Greg Hermanovic, bought back the software, continued development on it, and that eventually became Houdini. I listened to a bunch of podcasts with them. I was kind of surprised at how much big business has shaped VFX. And also I'd never made the connection before between Unix pipes and nodes. After that, I downloaded Houdini, went to the official Getting Started page and started working my way through the Foundations course. My first impressions of Houdini was it felt like a really solid professional piece of software. Over the next couple of days, I went over the course. It went through a lot of the things that Houdini can do, but I did kind of find it hard to follow some of the instructions. There were some differences between previous version of Houdini used in the tutorial and the latest version which I was using. I think I might have gotten more out of it if I wasn't a complete beginner in Houdini and already had a little bit of experience. Simulations in Houdini were really impressive. Compared to Blender, they just work straight out of the box and can handle so many items in the simulation. From there, I just kept looking at the history. I found this old video from the early days of 3D where they had to measure individual points on a real model and then put them in one by one. It's pretty crazy how far 3D has come. I listened to this interview with Estela, who created the holograms for the Avengers, and looked at his website called CGWiki, which I ended up using quite a lot. Then I was looking at some of the employees of Side Effects Software who create Houdini. I found this cool framework, which is kind of like a live TouchDesigner thing. I listened to this talk by Mark Elendt, and I also listened to this interview with Simon Holmedal, who creates a lot of cool cinematic looking ads. After that, I went back to the Getting Started page and went on with the next tutorial, which was by CG Forge. As a beginner, this tutorial was really easy to follow along with. It gets you started with camera, a light, and how to render something, like as one of the first things. It covers a lot of the pitfalls that you fall into and how to get out of them. By the end of the tutorial, I had created this scene, and then I went on with some of the exercises that he set as well. I was finding a lot of the learning material up until this point was very focused on getting you into the VFX industry as fast as possible, which makes sense because it's a VFX industry tool, but I just wanted to play around and make little animations. So I tried to do just something simple, like moving up each point in a grid by its index. So point 1 moves up 1, point 2 moves up 2. I was trying to just do that in nodes, but I was finding it kind of hard. And then that's when I discovered VEX. VEX is a super fast scripting language within Houdini that's based on the C programming language. And it's a really straightforward way to move around points in a mesh. I was looking at some paid courses to learn VEX, but they seemed like they would take quite a long time. And then I discovered JoyVex, which was a 20-day course by Estela on his website CGWiki. And I decided I wanted to do that. And that was the end of my first week. I really enjoyed JoyVex. It was a very straightforward course and teaches you a lot about Houdini as well as just how 3D works in general. The course covers a lot of different topics and shows you how to create Voronoi noise and cross products, and also creating quite complex looking 3D animations using just simple mathematical operations like sine or clamping a value. The course also covers creating custom parameters to control values, as well as the debugging and visualization system in Houdini, so you can have a better look at the data that you're working with. You can visualize data as a color or a number or a line, depending on what you're trying to understand. I also really liked his take on treating learning Houdini as if you're learning an instrument. After that, I watched this video that he recommended on learning more effectively, stumbled across this website by the Berlin Math School on visualizing things with Houdini, was looking at old Standford Graphics stuff and Kinetic Sculptures. I kept hearing about this role called a TD, so I looked that up. And then I went back to the Getting Started page and went on with the next tutorial, which was Houdini is hip. This was another really easy to follow along with tutorial. It started with a bit of compositing and then simulations, starting with particle simulations, moving on to soft body and cloth simulations, rigid body, smoke, and then combining some of these simulations together, and then finally ending on fluid simulations, which are the most complex. And that was the end of week 2. From here, I looked at where a lot of the simulations in Houdini come from, and I found that a lot of them are based on open source algorithms Like the rigid body system is based on the bullet solver, and Vellum is based on extended position-based dynamics, or XPBD, which was made by this guy Matthias who works at NVIDIA. And I found that he released this 10-minute physics course where he breaks down how a lot of it works. I listened to the Entagma Rant podcast, which gave some really good insight from people who've been working in the VFX industry and have used Houdini for a long time. I followed their Houdini in 5-minute tutorial series on YouTube, which gave a lot of interesting techniques. And then I listened to another interview with Simon Holmedal and also one with Refik, Anadol and Thorp. I was feeling pretty confident using Houdini at this stage and started playing around with some growing effects. I was finding it hard to add points to the mesh as it was growing and found out I needed a SOP solver. CGWiki had a good breakdown of how that worked, so I went through that and kept playing around with time as an element in the growing. From here I was playing around with growing volumes. I started looking into VDBs, which are kind of like a file format for holding volumes. I listened to these interviews with Museth, the guy who created OpenVDB. The guy has a pretty top-notch resume. He worked at SpaceX, NVIDIA, Weta, and DreamWorks. And that was the end of my 3rd week. For the 4th week in Houdini, I wanted to make a showcase, and I was playing around with growing effects to put in there, but they were all feeling a bit flat. I was looking at some work by Paul Esteves, who creates all this dynamic looking stuff with Vellum, so I decided to learn a little bit more about Vellum. I listened to this talk by Paul and followed this basics course, and then this course which was a bit more advanced, but it shows how to get all sorts of different types of effects and using attributes in Vellum as well. I spent some time mucking around in Vellum, making weird stuff, and then I made this crane simulation, which I really liked the look of, and I used that lighting setup for the showcase. I was able to take that knowledge of Vellum and apply it to rigid body by being able to bring in attributes and control that over time. And then I learned a little bit about height fields and terrains and spent a couple of days rendering out shots for a showcase, and this is it. Kind of wish I would have learned Houdini earlier in my life, but I think it also would have been way more challenging without the prerequisite 3D knowledge I have. Also, I found even though Houdini is such an amazing tool, it's still up to you as the artist to make something look cool.